Hello. Hello, my dear friends. Welcome to our DLD Sync show. I have the great pleasure and the joy to introduce you to two amazing friends of us. They are not only friends of us, they are also friends to themselves. So thank you, Don Barber. You had the idea for this shows today. Thank you for this. It's really very much appreciated. And now to our speakers. Yossi Vardi. Who of you don't know Yossi Vardi? Everyone knows Yossi Vardi. An amazing investor with an outstanding legacy, the godfather of startup nation Israel, global market expert, and of course, my long-term, very dear DLD co-chairman and friend. And Sir Ronnie Cohen, a philanthropist, a venture capitalist, a private equity investor, and a social innovator, who I've also known since his days as founding partner and chairman at Apex Partners. He and Alan Patrickhoff were the trailblazers of venture capital in Europe. They are heroes of a whole generation of VCs. Both are not only known for their impressive professional achievements, both are united for their deep love and passion for Israel, and in their energetic drive to create a fairer, and more prosperous future for all of us. Ronnie just published his wonderful and very impressive book, Impact, and How to Reshape Capitalism to Drive Real Change. In these uncertain times, this book gives us guidelines to solve global challenges with optimism, courage, and a great compassion for humanity. Ronald and Yossi, I look very much forward to this conversation, to your conversation. It's a highlight of the DLD Sync series. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being there.
Thank you, Steffi, for your wonderful introduction. I hope half of it is true. And we will go to the business. We have a lot of things to cover. Sir Ronald, I would like to spend the next 45 minutes to 1 hour trying to find the answer to three questions. How you became one of the foremost leaders and founders of the VC industry in the world. The second one, why did you, after you made it really to make the Apex, you brought it to such a wonderful success, you threw everything behind your back and you began to develop from zero a whole new industry yet again, which is the impact investment, and why and how you you got the mission to evangelize this industry, and how is it going? So these are the topic we are going to cover, and let's start with the first one. Please tell us how you came to a to a totally plain board and started the VC industry from nothing and arrived to be the biggest VC in Europe.
Thank you, Yossi, and you know how much of a pleasure it is for me to be here with Steffi and with you. And if Hubert Burda is listening, it's wonderful to be connected again. Hubert, we all go back such a long way. So, like everything in life, Yossi, luck plays a big part. I found myself as a student at a business school in the US at Harvard in the mid-60s. And the prevailing culture, as you know, in those days was big is beautiful. Everybody in the MBA class, virtually, wanted to join a big company, to join an IBM or a General Motors or whatever. But I heard a speech by one of the first venture capitalists, an unlikely figure, a French general called the General Doriot, who taught at the business school, and who came to say that he'd invested in a new company called DEC, Digital Equipment. He'd invested $70,000 in it, and he was going to be taking out $100 million when it floated. And as you can imagine, it caught my attention. I thought, wow, this is a good business model. And I had got a scholarship because I didn't have the means to afford an education at Harvard Business School. I got a scholarship called the Henry Fellowship, which paid for my first year at business school and carried an obligation to bring something useful back to the UK. And so I brought back this idea that small was going to be beautiful, that actually companies which are big and in leadership positions have little propensity to seek disruption or innovation. And technology was going to imply that. And so I thought, you need to be thinking in different ways to be successful at it. And I think small will be beautiful. So that's how I managed to get in on what was eventually to become a huge wave, which has taken us to a pool of private equity and venture capital of $5 trillion today.
So we can say that in contrary to the common thinking, you thought that taking $70,000 and getting out of it 100 million can be a nice business model.
Exactly.
Good. So you brought it to Europe. At that time, there was no VC in Europe. How Apex came into being and how did it grow so much?
So I was 26 when we started what became Apex. So in a way, I could share the thinking of these new young entrepreneurs. Our first fund was launched 9 years after we started in 1972. And it resulted from a friendship which lasts to this day with Alan Patricof, whom Steffi mentioned.
Sure.
I met Alan in 1975. I started in 72. In those days, a venture capital fund was usually about $2.5 million, Yossi, hard to believe. 10 individuals putting up $250,000 each is what Alan had under management. And when regulation changed in the US in 1978 to allow pension funds to invest in venture capital funds, Alan raised a $30 million fund, and I traveled with him to meet all the European institutions, the Philips Pension Fund among them, and to talk about how this entrepreneurship shouldn't just be an American phenomenon. It could be a European phenomenon. Of course, it turned out to be a huge success in Israel, and that we should be able to raise venture capital funds in Europe, just as we did in the United States. And Alan, after he raised his $30 million from $2.5 million to $30 million, after a single change in regulation to allow corporate pension funds to invest in venture capital, helped me to raise our first fund in Europe in 1981. It was the biggest fund in Europe, together with Advent International's £10 million fund. £10 million, nothing.
How much the investors got back?
Every one of the funds made money. But I wanted to make the point about growth because the largest fund that Apex has raised to date is 11 billion euros.
And can you invest $11 billion with enough care and attention?
So the biggest I had was a $5 billion raised in 2002, which delivered more than a 30% net IRR. And it was
can I invest retroactively in the fund?
Very small amounts for you, Yossi. We will allow. Why? Because actually, I defined the role of APACs at the time as not being able to achieve the highest IRR, but being able to achieve the highest IRR on very big amounts of money. So I liked small early stage investing, which Alan is still continuing to do now at the age of 85. But I also like big transactions. As you know, we funded the acquisition of Bezek in 2005 in Israel, the telecommunications company, and that was a $500 million investment for our fund. So I found it exciting to build a big firm which would continue, and to anticipate your next, or at least the second question. The reason I left APAC.
No. Before we go there, I have one final question for this chapter. A few years ago, you wrote a book for young people, how to succeed in investments and in VC. Give us maybe 3 takeaways of your experience, how to be a good investor.
Okay, so the book was called The Second Bounce of the Ball, because if you're investing well, you have to anticipate not the first bounce of the ball, which everybody can see, but the second bounce of the ball, which nobody can be sure about. And that book basically said, uncertainty is the friend of the entrepreneur and the venture capitalist. We call it risk, which has a negative connotation because actually it comes from Italian word, which means running away from something. But if you view it as uncertainty, you begin to realize that you can only achieve great success financially or in building up a business if you turn uncertainty into your friend. Where there is certainty, you can't make huge returns. And the punchline of that book was start young, think big, and stick with it. Many people think they can't start a business until they're well into their 30s. I discovered something different. I started at the age of 26, and I realized that if you get into a new field ahead of others, then you acquire expertise in it before others do. You have the advantage of having been one of the pioneers of the field, and you can have a good shot at leading the whole field. And so starting young, and I think all of us by our mid-20s know enough to be able to start a business, is where it is right to start. Now, of course, many people start later, and that's perfectly fine, but we shouldn't be inhibited about starting young. And of course, your son showed that, Yossi, with ICQ. And then,
Go ahead, please.
The second thing is think big. Like the thinking that I have to think about becoming a successful small business before I want to become a big one was, in my view, not right. Businesses grow, as you well know, Yossi, to the vision of their founders. I've never seen a business grow beyond the vision of the founder. And so start with a big vision and you will achieve something big. And then the last bit of it, stick with it. Everything has its ups and downs. You will often wonder, am I on the right path? Well, you have to persevere. If the answer is yes, I'm on the right path, but I'm not getting to the right destination yet, then you have to wonder about how you might do things differently to progress more quickly along the path. but you don't question the path. If you think venture capital is going to be big and it's taken you longer to get into it or to develop your first funds, if you know it's the right thing and it's going to be successful, stick with it. Many people drop out. Our first 2 partners dropped out after 2 years. Our initial 4 partners, we were a 4-person group out of Harvard Business School before I met Alan, and 2 of them dropped out after 2 years. They thought we wouldn't be successful. And that's when actually I met Alan and we became partners to replace the US partner who left.
Okay, before we go to the second part, let me make a few reflections, if you allow me. Number 1, your advice to start young reminds me the old advice of Paul Getty. You know, Paul Getty, the oil tycoon, was asked once by a young person, how can I succeed in life? He told him 3 steps: start young, work hard, and strike oil. So these are...
Oh, wow. Okay.
This is a good advice. Second thing, you mentioned that the guy from whom you learned about the DEC situation was a French guy. You know, the word entrepreneur is also a French word.
Absolutely.
And we in Israel, when we started high-tech, we didn't know what is entrepreneur until somebody told us the Israeli definition of the entrepreneur. You know what it is? This is how a Jewish mother called her unemployed son. So, okay, now we are now moving to the second part. So at the peak of your career, when Apex was like a world colossal in the VC industry, you decided to throw everything away and to focus on bettering some situations. I think you started with a jail in England, and you invented the impact investment.
Yeah.
Two things. Why did you decide to make this change, and how did you make this change?
Okay, so I got into venture capital for 2 reasons. One, I needed to make money. My family lost everything in Egypt when we left as refugees in 1957. I was 11 and a bit years old. I knew I'd have to look after my parents financially. And so I had to make money. But it was also an idealistic time. It was the 60s. And a bit like today's millennial generation, we aspired to improve the world. It was the campaign against nuclear disarmament and the equality of opportunity for all, and so on. And I thought by getting into venture capital, I had a shot like General Dorio at making money, but also at providing jobs. There were 3 million unemployed in Britain at the time when we kicked off. And then I built Apex. It had the $20 billion under management. And it was an upward moving escalator. And at the age of 53, I began to say to myself and to my partners, I'm not going to stay here beyond the age of 60. And actually, even today, every partner at Apex leaves at the age of 60. We're going to create a constitution. I'm going to leave at the age of 60. I want to deal with 2 issues. I want to deal with social issues, because I had seen the gap between rich and poor expand as venture capital and entrepreneurship got going. And I want to help something that you're also passionate about, Yossi and Steffi and Hubert, help to resolve the Middle East conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. And I thought, look, I've made enough money. I don't want my epitaph to read, he delivered a 30% IRR. I want to do something meaningful, and I will need 20 years to do that. And then luck played its own role. I had already decided I didn't care about the upward moving escalator. I'd made more money than I could spend, and I said to myself, whether You swim in deep water or in deep enough water, you swim the same way. So there's no sense in just accumulating more money. Let's see if I can make a dent in solving these two big challenges that we face. And luck played a role, Yossi. Having decided this in 1998, in 2000, I got a phone call from the British Treasury saying, will you look at the issue of poverty? And I began to analyze how our system deals with poverty. And I realized, although we'd be brilliant at imagining venture capital to help those who want to make money out of tech and entrepreneurship, we really had never given any thought about bringing investment capital to those who want to improve lives on the planet. And that set me off, as you say, on the road to impact investment. So in 2000, I got the phone call from the Treasury. There were several steps in between. But in 2010, we achieved the objective that we set out in our report of 2000, that you needed to bring financial and social expertise together to connect social entrepreneurs with the capital markets. And we developed the first social impact bond in the world. Now there are 200 or so, tackling a dozen or more social issues in more than 30 countries. And as you say, the first one was the Peterborough Bond, which dealt with young people leaving Peterborough jail, 60% of whom went back to jail within 18 months of release, a statistic which holds everywhere in the world. And we defined this new security where the investors put up money to fund charitable organizations working with the prisoners. We raised £5 million. And then the government pays us back according to the reduction in the number of prisoners going back to jail, which led to a 9.7% reduction in the number and the investors getting their money back and the 3.1% annual return. And that, in a way, was the beginning of real impact investing, optimizing risk, return, and impact through an activity.
Yeah, I remember, I remember very vividly at that time when you just began to talk. You didn't talk, you were going in conferences and holding people by their baton and pitching them about this idea. And I asked you, what is the rationale? You told me that at that time you made a calculation that the whole philanthropic industry was like 1% of the whole business, the total of business. And if you can move philanthropy to be treated like business, you will increase the amount which go into social project. If you compare today, what are the amounts you think that already moving into impact investment and how it's going to grow?
So there's about 500 billion a year in philanthropy. This year we will hit $1 trillion in impact investment, equal to venture capital, which is $1 trillion. Private equity is $4 trillion. And the definition is that you achieve, let me put it differently, you have the intention to achieve impact as well as profit, and you measure the impact that you achieve. But, Yossi, even more importantly, 30 trillion, equivalent to more than a third of professionally managed assets in the world, trillions, goes to ESG investing today to achieve impact as well as profit, but without measuring it, because we don't have the transparency on impact. And perhaps the most exciting thing I've done in my whole life is the work I'm doing with Harvard Business School today to allow us to show the total impact of companies so that we can look at them and we can set off their positive and negative impacts from their products, their operations, and their employment against the profits they make. And I can tell you about that if you're interested.
Oh, that's very interesting. So actually, you have done a fusion, and you brought into the philanthropic machine a little bit of greed to the investors.
Yeah, I think I realized that we couldn't solve our big environmental and social challenges within our existing system, because our system today allows companies to pursue profit and create damage, huge damage, environmentally and socially, as a consequence of their efforts to make money. And
go ahead, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And sometimes companies do this without knowing the damage they're creating, and sometimes they do it knowingly. And we published just a few weeks ago at Harvard Business School, open source, you can all go and look at it, a data set on 1,800 companies. You look for impact-weighted accounts and you can access the data set, measuring and monetizing the environmental impact of these 1,800 companies. And Yossi, what is your reaction if I tell you that 15% of these 1,800 companies, more than 250 of them, create more environmental damage in a year than they make money, than they make profit? And that the full third create environmental damage equivalent to 25% of their profit. And that within the same sector, you will find companies of similar size, even in fossil fuels, which I am against investing in. You look at ExxonMobil, and it delivers $39 billion of damage from its operations in a single year. Shell delivers 22, and BP delivers 13. So even within the worst sectors, you have huge gaps between leaders and laggards. And what is interesting, because you're a great visionary, Yossi, as an investor and in seeing trends ahead of others, the ESG money and the impact money, that 32 trillion today that I was talking about, has already had its effect. You can already see a correlation, Yossi, between higher pollution and lower market cap, lower PE multiples. And so the capital markets are beginning to optimize risk, return, and impact, just like the first social impact bond did. And the thesis of the book of impact is the whole world is going to that. It started with young consumers not wanting to buy the products of certain companies because they didn't share their values, and young employees refusing to work for these companies. Investors became aware of it. Now there's more than 30% of professionally managed money, way beyond tipping point, going to achieve impact. And if we gain transparency on this impact, then companies will have to go in that direction. Now, some of them are already going, but many are hoping that they can continue to create damage and make money without anybody really noticing. So for me, the next frontier for society, for capitalism, is impact transparency through impact-weighted financial accounts that reflect both profitability and impact.
Yeah, I must give a testimonial that at this first talk that we had, when you told me about your ideas how to turn philanthropy on its head, you explained to me why it's so important to create a whole new science of bookkeeping to social benefits, and also to find the beneficiary who will be willing to pay for it. This was like two pillars of the whole approach.
Yes.
Question, do you regard yourself as a revolutionary? Like Che Guevara of the finance?
Well, I do regard impact as revolutionary. And
yeah, but you are carrying the flag.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a revolution, and I'm proud to be one of the flag bearers of it. I think it's a revolution which will go as far as the tech revolution did, Yossi. I think it's going to change the business models of the biggest companies, and if they don't change, they're going to be overtaken, like Tesla has overtaken General Motors and its other US competitors, because the world is shifting to risk-return impact. And, I give the example of impact ventures now that we would never have imagined 10 years ago even, or 15 years ago. I give the example of Orcam, which you're familiar with, in Israel. This is a company that was started by the most successful of entrepreneurs in the whole world, who created Mobileye and sold it out for $15 billion to Intel. And the aunt of one of the two founders, Amnon Shashur, was going blind, as I think you know, Yossi, and asked her nephew to help her. And he designed an impact venture to help the blind. He designed a pair of spectacles that whisper into the ear of the wearer the page of the book they're reading, very professionally read, the banknote in their hand, the address on the back of the envelope that they've just received. Now you'd say, wow, amazing impact venture. It has a market of 35 million blind people, 250 million visually impaired people, and it's raised money at a $600 million valuation. It's raised $100 million so far. Amazing impact venture. But here is the disruption. If you begin to think from an impact perspective, you ask yourself the question, how can this technology help the largest number of people in the world? And you get a surprising answer, Yossi. The answer is, what if you gave these spectacles to the 800 million illiterate adults in the world? What would that do for their lives and livelihood, or for their economies? And so all of a sudden, you begin to understand that an impact unicorn is a unicorn that's worth $1 billion and helps the lives of 1 billion people, or the environment, of course.
You mentioned the attitude of the young generation when you studied in Harvard, and we see a lot of similarities between the attitudes of the millennia and the flower kids generation of the 60s.
Yeah.
To what extent you attribute the current success of this trend to the nature of these people? And the personal remark, you and I were born at a time which was very utilitarian. It was just around the Second World War. We are dinosaurs. There was not much food, not much clothing, not much anything. And the two of us came from the belly of our mothers with a to-do list, go to kindergarten, go to elementary school, go to high school, go to university, get a degree, marry a wife, make 3 kids, take a mortgage, buy an apartment, find a job, and then you can start life at the age of 35. These kids are drafting, they have a totally different psyche than the two of us. To what extent you attribute the success on your ability to hook up to this kind of demography?
So, I was brought up, and maybe you were brought up to be the same. I was brought up to work for myself. Don't work for others. Be an entrepreneur, create your own business. And I had the sense that starting in my mid-20s was a brave and bold and exciting thing to do. One of the answers to your question, which somebody has suggested to me, is that actually our generation, the flower power generation, were the teachers of the current millennials. And that's why these two generations in between, actually, which were very materialistic and self-centered and egoistic, or I call it selfish capitalism in the book, sort of missed out. This new millennial generation has a completely different view. First of all, it's connected. It therefore empathizes globally with people who are in need. It has a greater sense of fairness of the system. It understands that these huge gaps in inequality aren't a good thing for society. When you look at what happened with the Black Lives Matter movement, when you see what happened in France, in Chile, and Lebanon with violent rebellions, when you look at the result of the Brexit referendum, which had a lot to do with inequality in Britain, you realize inequality is a bad thing for society. And then we have these huge environmental threats that threaten the existence of the planet if we don't do anything about them. So this generation didn't start the problem, but I think is determined to change it. It doesn't want to inherit and maintain a world that is self-defeating, where the more you grow, the more damage you create, the less governments taxing us can manage to remedy the damage, the more social inequality threatens the cohesion of society, and the more the planet is threatened. And so I really think it is a revolution. And if tech created the water on which every ship must sail today, impact is going to bring another layer of water on top of tech to do the same. I think businesses that just make money and create problems in their wake are not going to attract the talent, the loyal consumers, or the loyal investors. The most successful businesses are going to have high impact integrity and deliver impact performance as well as financial performance. But if you don't have transparency, if you can't take a profit and loss statement and the balance sheet and look at it and say, I can see the profit and I can see the positive and negative product impacts, and I can net them out. And I can see the positive and negative employment impacts and the operational impacts on people and planet, and net them out. So that if I buy a box of Twinings tea from the supermarket shelf, I know that Associated British Foods, which made it, makes $1.6 billion of profit, but creates $1.8 billion of environmental damage. And I'm not going to buy that product. So we have a movement now, and it really is a revolutionary movement. We have a movement now of consumers, of employees, and of investors, basically saying to companies, you have to improve the environment and improve lives while you make money, which, if you translate it into business terms, means you have to optimize risk-return impact. And otherwise, if you don't, you're going to be punished. Your valuation is going to go through the floor, while the valuations of others that know how to optimize risk-return impact is going to head for the skies, like Tesla.
We have left with about 20 minutes, which we are going to divide as following. I would like to ask you one tough question, then I would like to conclude by you telling us about the book and the message you want to send to the audience. You know, they have to pay us with their attention for the benefit of listening to you. And then we will have a short Q&A. Now about the question that we talked before the conversation. You know, you devoted a lot of effort to these areas for the last 15 years or so. I devoted also some areas. We made a dent, a big one, a small one. Something happened, and then half a year ago came the Corona tsunami, threw hundreds of millions of people under the train, took lot of employees, made them unemployed, lot of independent people, made them going bankrupt. You know, the whole shape of society, especially the weaker elements, kind of have no hope. They have to raise the next generation of kids, and kids which are being raised in homes which cannot provide them all the needs are bearing the results for the rest of their life. What's going to happen to the world?
So I think this is accelerating impact investment, because I agree with your analysis, Yossi, and the conclusion of it is, how can we cope if governments come out faced by these huge challenges, which are going to be expressed through high levels of unemployment for a number of years, because big companies are not going to recruit back the people that they've laid off. They're slimming down. They've learned to slim down through the crisis. How are we going to find jobs for these people? And what are going to be the implications for those who are left behind? What if you're an elderly...
And to their kids, and to their kids.
And their kids, and it's transmitted from generation to generation. The only answer is governments must bring companies and investors alongside to bring solutions instead of creating problems. You know, in 1929, after the crash, investors sat up and realized they'd been investing in companies without knowing what profits they made. In those days, every company could pick its own accounting principles, and there were no auditors. And companies could even put part of their profit in a hidden reserve without telling shareholders. Unbelievable. And people argued then that if we wanted to move to a single set of generally accepted accounting principles for every company, wherever it is in the United States, and it started in the US and later in the world, that would be the end of American capitalism, right? So in 1933, we got transparency on profit. And part of the challenge we face today, if we want to bring companies on side to bring solutions rather than problems, we need transparency on their impact now. So we need to do what our predecessors did in 1933, 4 years after the 29 crash. We need to do the same thing now for transparency on profit. And if we do that, then we will completely change, and this is what the book is about, what drives our system. Instead of driving our economic system through profit alone, we're going to drive it through impact and profit. And so the New Deal for our era is to get companies to reduce inequality and to reduce environmental pollution and improve the earth. Now, how do you reduce inequality? Well, if I say to you that you can measure diversity and cost it, how do you do that? Go to the Harvard site, IWA, Impact Weighted Account. Intel is a company which has made a big effort to improve the well-being of its workforce. It pays $7 billion to its workforce a year in the United States. And yet, if you compare the diversity which technology enables us to do, within Intel, with the demographics around Intel's facilities, and if you compare the differences in pay for gender or for other reasons, it reduces the positive impact from $7 billion to $3.5 billion a year. Now, if you can measure that for every tech company, you begin to create a race to the top. And we are going to be publishing in the next very few months employment impact of a large number of companies, as well as their product impact. How much pollution they are creating, what saturated oil content they have, how sugar content, and so on and so forth. So the key today is to change our system so that it can bring solutions. Now, I visited with you, Yossi, schools in poor parts of Israel where unbelievable social entrepreneurs are trying to change the lives of a whole generation of young people and have difficulty in raising philanthropic money to achieve this. Impact investment enables us to bring investment capital to social entrepreneurs, whether they're using a charitable model or a profit with purpose model.
We should have a talk after this interview. Give me very quickly, and this will be the last question, and then a word about the book and Q&A. The 5 countries which are on the top of your list in understanding the matters, and the 5 financial leaders in the world who have the same sharing with you your passion.
So I think the 5 countries that are in the lead in understanding this are the UK, the US, Japan, France, New Zealand. I think those, Portugal, Israel.
Interesting.
Those are a handful of countries. The Global Steering Group for Impact Investment, which I chair, works in 33 countries. So there are 33 countries around the world now where impact is taking root. But those are the countries which have either released unclaimed assets from bank accounts to set up social investment banks, brought in tax incentives, got their pension funds to invest in ESG and in impact and so on. Now, to answer your question, BlackRock became very famous because Larry Fink in 2018 sent a letter to all the CEOs of the companies in which it had invested its $7 trillion of assets, saying, look, if you want to succeed in the future, you're going to have to do good as well as do well. Since then, the most unlikely investment firms, Bridgewater, a very conservative, traditional investment firm, just made a presentation to 1,000 CIOs saying the future is risk-return impact. That's how you're going to deliver superior returns. This notion that if you optimize risk-return impact, you'll do better than optimizing risk-return is just wrong. So you have Bridgewater, you have Schroeder Ventures. Peter Harrison described impact as a mega trend. You have Prince Max of Liechtenstein, who heads up LGT, a $300 billion investment organization, who's a firm believer in it. And you have 8, 9 private equity firms and venture capital firms that are all launching impact funds, the biggest names in private equity. And then there were venture capitalists years ago, Bridges Fund Management, Double Bottom Line, Leapfrog, Avishkar in India, that had already started to do this. And so within venture capital, it'll take 5 years, and over a third of all venture capital firms will be impact venture capital. And within equity, it may happen even sooner.
Last question, why we should buy your book?
Well, first of all, by buying my book, you're pushing royalties to impact charities. The second thing is, it may just give you a sense of where your career needs to go if you want to be successful and to be fulfilled. In the same way, as I said in my book in 2007, Start Young, Think Big, and Stick with it, today I would add, and find a big problem that you're passionate about solving, and create a business model that enables you to make more money as you deliver more impact and improve people's lives and the environment.
Yeah, I think the key word is, as you said, is feeling fulfilled, which is more important than anything else. Ronnie, this was really a wonderful presentation, and you are a very inspiring guy. I cannot, it's really amazing how one individual can inspire a whole generation. Thank you very much. We have time for 2 questions, I think. So back to Steffi, and again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Yossi. Always a pleasure to share the platform with you.
Thank you. I'm so impressed. I almost lacking words, because really you made my day, my year. Both of you. You are an amazing guys, and I think your session right now was not only a call to action. It was an enormous wake-up call for all of us. So, but let's do some formalities. We have many audience questions. Here's one. How does impact investment relate to universal basic income? Are they compatible?
I think they're separate issues. Universal basic income may be a very wise thing to do in solving social issues and huge inequality. But what impact investment is trying to do is to use the flows of capital and the activities of companies to harness innovation and other human and financial resources to bring solutions at the same time as we bring profit.
Thank you, Ronnie. I personally have also a question. What is the question you always wanted to ask Yossi?
You know, Yossi is a visionary who saw the birth of the venture capital industry and has seen it grow and participate in its growth. I would ask Yossi, do you think impact is going to change the world?
Look, I don't know if impact is going to change the world, but I can tell you one thing, that without impact, the world is not going to be changed. That's for sure, you know, it's for sure, because we tried, and we keep trying, you know, all kinds of economic machines, capitalism, socialism, I don't know, laissez-faire. As many thinkers, you have such a method, and at the end of the day, you have to stick to what works and to enhance it and to empower it. And we see very dramatic results in the whole impact approach in a very short time. You know, if you take the amount of funds, you divide it by number of years, you get staggering numbers. So I think that if we want to change the world, this is the way, but you should continue your evangelism, because there are so many companies to convince and so many accountants and so many governments. And the question is how you turn it into a trend, you know, into tsunami. And the answer is, as we said, is by hooking to the young generation who is looking for a new mission, for a new secular religion. And I think this is what can be provided.
I think we all should read this book. It gives us not only insights, it will inspire. It gives us inspiration. And as I said, a call for action. And we should be very optimistic that we can change our world. And I really thank you both for this amazing show. Thank you. It's not a show, it's reality. And thank you for this reality check. Thank you.
Thank you, Steffi.
Thank you very much, Steffi.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Yossi. Goodbye.
Thank you, Ron.